bit of introduction. Comrade John Trimble is a professor in industrial engineering at the TUT, Tshwane University of Technology. In the past, he has taught engineering and computer science in the USA, Rwanda, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. He is the director of the International Network on Appropriate Technology. He has been organizing with the All African People's Revolutionary Party since 1975, and having spent most of that time with the likes of Kwame Ture. He has served in various capacities with the A-APRP in Africa and the USA. He has helped organize Africa Liberation Day in the USA, Kenya, Senegal, Zimbabwe, and Azania. He is committed to help build a revolutionary African intelligentsia that works with the masses for Pan-Africanism. And he is always looking forward to a liberated and unified Africa under scientific socialism. Welcome to our platform, Professor John Trimble.
Thank you for inviting me. I want to first congratulate AZAPO for having this kind of forum, because political education is so key to the development of a broader Pan-African movement and to the liberation of Africa and its development under socialism. So let me move right into the presentation, because I want to move quickly through a few
please do.
So that we can devote more time to questions and answers. So as we said, the topic, the impact of developments in the USA on the diaspora and Africa itself. And I have to point out that the points I'm going to raise in this talk are a direct result of the ongoing development I've been able to have by being part of a cadre political education circle. And that's how the All African People's Revolutionary Party organizes. It organizes in these cells or circles where we seriously take political education study on a regular basis. So I'm going to cover basically these 6 topics. I think to really understand the current situation in the US and the damage it's doing, you need to understand its legacy. So that's why I'm going to start with the legacy, pointing out settler colonialism and white privilege, and then go into how it's developed in terms of such a massive police, prison, military, and intelligence complex, and then look specifically at the military bases and AFRICOM, and talk about the illusion of democracy that the US presents, and how in fact, instead of a democracy, it really represents the major neo-colonial oppressive force in the world. Then I'm going to speak to the necessity of Pan-African unity. So first, people talk about colonialism as if it's over. But really, the most damage done by the colonial process has been the result of the genocidal efforts by European settlers that has resulted in the most successful settler colony of the United States of America, but then also Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And we see that the attempts in Africa range from Zimbabwe to South Africa to even Algeria, which I'll speak to. So this massive amount of settlerism has resulted in what we see today in terms of the English-speaking settlerism represents such a massive landmass. If you think about Canada, the United States, and Australia being 3 of the 10 largest countries in the world, and the mass amount of land that they occupy far out over scale the initial land that England had. Many people weren't aware that Algeria was an attempt by France as a settler colony, only the Algerian Liberation War put an end to that. And at the end of the liberation struggle in Algeria, 1 million French people got in boats and went back home. So that was the failure of the French settler colony. But Spanish colonies, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, and we know that Brazil is the largest Portuguese-speaking country in the world. And this basically was a settler colony of Portugal. So we have to understand this legacy of settler colonialism because it has such an impact on what's going on today. Secondly, many people speak of white supremacy, but we don't understand that the history of white supremacy really came out of the US. During the early period of settlerism, people were fighting each other. You had the French fighting the British and the Portuguese and the Spanish fighting, and they didn't think of themselves as white people then. They were the Portuguese or the French, or then they were fighting each other. It was only through the creation of the United States where you had more than just one set of Europeans coming in that the white notion of whiteness was actually created. The white people became white people because of the United States of America. And with this whole notion of superiority came about both because they justified this in terms of the settlers stealing the land, and that they were claiming these indigenous people were inferior, whether it was in Algeria, or whether it was in Azania, or whether it was across the Americas, and then also through the use of slavery. So there's a legacy now in terms of this white supremacy. And there's also the notion of white privilege, in that there are, many people who are in Europe or in the US who recognize this legacy of white supremacy and are opposed to it, but they also enjoy white privilege because of the dominance of white supremacy. So it's important to recognize both of those, because it's not just sufficient for someone to recognize that there was settlerism and that there was white supremacy. If they are white, they also have to recognize this fact that they have this white privilege on a global scale. I want to then move to look at really what is happening in the US over this period. It's a massive police force. People don't realize there are almost 18,000 different police agencies across the United States and over 800,000 law enforcement officers. And this started actually with what we call slave patrols that actually in the 18th century started. This was the first set of police in the US, and their job was to track down runaway slaves. So this is the legacy of police in the US. And as a result of this police state, the US has over 2.3 million people in prison, 800,000 on parole, and 6.6 million on probation. So that means under this whole justice police system, they control the lives of over 7 million people. And in the US, when they put you on probation, you actually have to pay fees to the Justice Department in order to, and they justify this to say, well, you have to, it's to pay for monitoring you under probation. So they actually take money out of people's check or force them to pay on a regular basis. So this is a very hideous system there. So if we look at it particularly, while Africans represent less than 14% of the US population, they represent almost 39% of the country's prison population. So this is a direct result of what we see in terms of the racism and the white supremacy that exists and perpetuates itself through this system. So be aware that this number of prisoners is the largest in the world. This is more than the prison population of China and India combined, whose population is a good 10 times that of the US. So we're going to look at the intelligence agents that are also part of this police network. The All-African People's Revolutionary Party in the 1970s launched a campaign that we call Smash the FBI and CIA. And this was an educational campaign to really expose the hideous things that these agencies were doing, from spying on Dr. King to infiltrating and causing disruptions to the Black Panther Party, to the CIA's involvement in the Congo and its involvement in the overthrow of Nkrumah, to its involvement in overthrowing governments from Iran to places in Central and South America. So it was a matter of exposing this because the US wants to project these as if they are justice-seeking agencies, and had this various media from movies to TV shows trying to project them in a light that's really erroneous. So we've had an ongoing effort to expose these and to call on other socialist movements to also engage in that. But what we see after 9/11, this creation of Homeland Security, an expansion of Homeland Security. And what people don't realize is Homeland Security isn't some agency that's just sitting in the US that's supposedly protecting US citizens against terrorism. They're Homeland Security officers here in Azania. They are Homeland Security officers across Africa, linked in with the embassies and linked in with other agencies in the various countries around the world. So it's pervasive. The NSA is a massive agency that, in terms of collecting data. They've been caught by WikiLeaks and exposed in terms of evading the privacy, not only of US citizens and Africans, but even, if you remember, the head of Germany, we were caught actually invading her privacy and taping her phone calls. The latest invention of this intelligence agencies is what's called Five Eyes. This is an alliance between the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. Now, think back on what I said earlier in terms of the settler colonies of the UK. This reflects those same countries. And these countries are now in a major cooperative effort in terms of military intelligence and human intelligence. So this is in line with the continuation and the legacy of settler colonialism. So this, in the US since World War II, there's been this growing military industrial complex. It started at the end of World War II because they had amassed such an effort to build up the weapons when the US entered in World War II in order to defeat Germany and Japan. And that left at the end of the war where the US was the only one really intact with this type of manufacturing operation. So there was an incentive to maintain this, and especially in the effort to contain the expansion of socialism. So this military industrial complex first grew under the auspices of the need to have this so-called defense against socialist and communist intrusions, but really, during the Cold War, but really was about profit for these corporations. So they're key military multinational corporations that I point out, but they're also about weapon sales. They sell massive amount of weapons to countries like Saudi Arabia. But what many people aren't aware of in terms of the devastation of this military is the extent in which they contribute to the damage to the climate. Just to give you an example, the US military emits 1.2 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas a year. This amount of gas is equivalent to 257 million cars. This was a statistic in 2001. That's the total number of cars at the time they're on the road in the US. So all the talk about trying to cut down emissions because you want to put a catalytic converter on a car, you realize that more damage is being done by the US military on a global scale. So what we see is that in this process that they are maintaining over 5,000 bases, and close to 700 or 800 of these are outside of the US. So it's a massive number of bases in the US, but hundreds and hundreds outside. So just to look at the top weapon makers, now this list of 5 companies is the global list. This isn't just the United States. What this means is the 5 largest companies in terms of top weapon companies are all in the United States. And their revenues in billions of dollars, ranging from $47 billion by Lockheed Martin to $22 billion by General Dynamics. So this is just something to soak in to make you realize the extent of militarism that exists in terms of the US. And this is used to prop up capitalism globally. This graph is to show you the comparison of defense money spent in the US, $610 billion. And this is more than, if you look on the column next to it, more than the combination of the next 7 countries, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, India, France, the UK, and Japan combined spend less money on military than the United States. So this just, and this is international statistics. This isn't something that just came out of analysis by the left. This is from the Stockholm International Peace Research effort. So it's important for us to understand the extent of what's going on. This map is, you can't see that well, but it just is to point out the various military bases that exist across Africa that are part of the effort that the US has in terms of its expanding of Afrikaans. And there's more information online about this. But what I want to speak to is this Afrikaans itself. What is it? This African Command of the US is set up in 2007. And the idea was expanding partnerships and interests in the African continent, as the US puts it. This is a quote from their site. So they make it sound like we're trying to take these partnerships and the interests of the USA now and somehow link it in with the interests of Africa. But we know it's not to the interests of Africa. So the activities in terms of 2019, their whole own document speaks to the fact that they've looked at locations 9 bases in 15 countries. That's what their documents say. We know that it actually is even more, but just to think of that number of bases in Africa is hideous. And to realize that there are no foreign bases in the US, there are no foreign bases in Canada, and in Australia, the only ones would be with UK or US. So while the US has extended this kind of activity across Africa, it's not reciprocal. And the thing to point out is not limited to whether the Democratic or the Republican Party is in control. And this is something in the Q&A we'll get back to more. But a lot of people think that, okay, now we've gotten rid of Trump, we've got the Democrats in power, and now there's going to be a difference. We'll see that it's not. The Afrikaan is consciously attempting to expand, is constantly courting different countries with offers to reciprocate with favors if they are allowed to put in bases. We have to be cautious of this. What we have to do is to fight back against Afrikaan by politically educating our organizations, the masses, our students, and we need to force and put forward in terms of the closure of all of these foreign bases in Africa. But this requires a Pan-African effort, because what we see is, we see that they have extended these bases in a very strategic way in certain countries. For instance, look at this map here. You see tiny Djibouti over to the side has foreign bases from 7 different countries. Now, anybody that knows, Djibouti is just a little small country, but it's key in terms of its location, its port. It's key in terms of the fact that it sits right there close to Somalia, close to the Middle East. So different countries have set up bases from naval ports that several countries have to a massive drone facilities that the US have and use to extend their drone activities across Africa and the Middle East. So this, and why are they able to do this? Djibouti uses this as a source of revenue, basically leasing out land, because it's a small country with less than 1 million people. But if Africa was united, if we could come as one force, we would make sure this would never happen. So you see the different flags represented here and the fact that there are bases all across, particularly straight across the whole of Africa here. And we know about the one in Botswana in terms of the air base there. So let me shift now to looking at what I call the illusions of the United States of America. The primary one is this illusion of democracy. The United States constantly projects itself as a democracy, and it constantly talks about that all of its efforts in terms of its military efforts around the world are to protect democracy. But we know that this is an illusion, and we can start identifying this illusion by just looking at what is happening in the US. It's basically, we know, a 2-party system. It says it's multi-party because there are other minor parties, but the Republican Party and the Democratic Party vastly outweigh any other party there. And why? Because they represent that 1%, that capitalist class, and they are funded in a massive fashion. For instance, we know that just this election in 2020, $14 billion was spent. $14 billion was spent in the presidential and Congress elections. And they weren't even electing all of the senators. They only elected 1/3 of the senators for office. So 1/3 of the senators and then the representatives who only for 2 years, and then the president. So you imagine if they had had all the senators running. So what is the real difference, this Trump's Republicans versus Biden's Democrats? Very little, very little. We see this in terms of several examples. If we see the militarism in Africa, who was it that authorized the bombing of a pharmaceutical plant in the Sudan, claiming that they had some type of chemicals there, and destroyed the largest pharmaceutical plant in not only the whole country, but that region? It was Clinton, a Democrat. Who was it that authorized the bombings in Libya that disrupted Libya? That was under Obama, with Madam Clinton as the Secretary of State. So we see that the Democrats have done the damage. The most glaring example of the fact that there's no real difference is on the damage that's been going on from the billions of dollars of damage that are being enacted on Zimbabwe with the sanctions there. We know that Bush started the sanctions. Obama came and many people were hoping there would be a change. There was no change. The sanctions continued. Trump came, there were no changes. Biden is now here. He is making not a whisper about ending the sanctions on Zimbabwe. And this is not sanctions that are affecting a small part of a leadership. These are sanctions that are affecting the millions of the masses, the working masses, the toiling masses, and this is a crime against humanity. So what did we see with these campaigns they had? We saw that Obama had this hope and change was his motto, and it sucked a lot of people in. This is the illusion of democracy that we have. Then you had Trump coming in talking about make America great again. And that sucked in a whole nother set of working class people into thinking that this is what we needed. And now, what is Biden's slogan? Unity. So somehow with this caustic type of environment that you see with people running into the Capitol with Confederate flags waving, that now he's coming under the banner of unity. But the reality is not that Americans are great. The problem is that Americans are the most ideologically ignorant and arrogant population in the world. That is the problem. And this is the dialectic of delusions that exist. People outside of America even think about, okay, the United States of America is great, but really think, how can we have this catastrophe that exists where such a large population of Africans are in prison and such a large amount of money is being spent on military and bases are all over? It's because the population in the country has voted for this out of ignorance and arrogance. So what we have as a result of that ignorance and arrogance is a USA that is the neo-colonial leader through military intervention, which we've seen from the map. It's intelligence agencies interventions, which we know from what has happened with Lumumba to what has happened more recently in terms of efforts across Africa. The way they operate and control the IMF World Bank. This is an example of what damage they're doing in Zimbabwe. One of the things that a part of the bill that they passed under Bush and has continued is the refusal to allow Zimbabwe any access at the IMF and World Bank. And what that does is that means that other banks will not allow any access, which means that the country doesn't have credit, which means that you're in trouble. Just imagine if you as an individual or you as a small businessman could not have credit. Small business couldn't operate. Everyone here is operating. You buy your car, your house is credit, right? You use a credit card at the grocery store. So imagine the damage that does in terms of a country. So this is the insidious nature of neocolonialism. Then there's the lure of the foreign direct investment. Now realize even this is affecting Azania, occupied Azania, South Africa, where they're talking about we need more foreign direct investment. But realize foreign direct investment means that Ford company comes over here and sets a plant up and they control it and they suck out the profits and send it back to wherever their stockholders are, i.e. in the US or Europe. So it's a form of exploitation. And somehow you have neocolonial representatives within our countries in Africa hoping that they get this under the claim that they'll get jobs. But really it is a lure that actually results in more oppression. Then we have the World Trade Organization, and the US control the prices and trade that are part of this overall situation. We have the NGOs and civic organizations that they control and use to manipulate within countries in Africa. It's all insidious. We need to understand and study all of these different forces. So what is our response? Our response has to be that we organize political parties, revolutionary political parties, but not political parties that are isolated within just the boundaries that have been set up by the Berlin Conference. Pan-African political parties. And we need to bring these parties together under the banner of Pan-African unity. This work is being done. The Worldwide Pan-African Movement, WWPAM, you can see our website at www.pam.org, is part of that effort. And this includes AZAPO, the A-APRP, the PAC, and a range of other organizations that are attempting to move in that direction. What we will eventually need is to answer the call of Kwame Nkrumah, which was the call for All African Committee for Political Coordination, which he spoke of in his Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And this will really bring our forces together and allow us to have this political coordination on a global scale that extends to Africans in the diaspora. How do we go about this? We need at this point in our history to develop a revolutionary African intelligentsia. We need to reach out to all sectors of our community. We need to reach out to our youth. We need to reach out to our universities where students are studying. We need to reach out to our women because they play an integral part in this, and to build a revolutionary African intelligentsia that studies and analyzes our problems in depth and takes this analysis and shares it with the masses so that we can organize on a Pan-African fashion, all of our people. That's what we need. And this requires a socialist approach. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to open it up, turn it back over to our coordinators so that we can open it up to look at particular questions that may have at this point.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Comrade Trimble, for that illuminating presentation that speaks to America's grand strategy, essentially of dominance. Whilst I was having technological issues, I'm hoping that you got a chance to introduce the All African People's Revolutionary Party. If you did not, maybe let's start off there. People are seeing two logos on the screen. They know AZAPO. If you can introduce the All African People's Revolutionary Party.
Yes, I only said a few words at the beginning, but I'm a cadre with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And our objective right there in the middle is one unified socialist Africa, which we realize that Pan-Africanism is the total liberation, unification of Africa and its development under scientific socialism. We are operating on a global scale. I'm an organizer here located in Tshwane, but we're doing work across Africa and the African diaspora.
Thank you for that. Comrades will remember that AZAPO and the PCMA have had long-standing relations with the All African People's Revolutionary Parties, dating from the days in exile. And those with gray hair like me might remember that Stokely Carmichael was here in 1997, yes, 1997, and he toured the country to help us commemorate the assassination of Stephen Bannon Biko. So we've had long fraternal relations with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and we are very glad to have you here in Azania. Maybe before we get into the nuts and bolts of the US grand strategy, let's first talk about the domestic policy, the experiences of Africans in the US in their daily lives. I think a week ago, Biden gave a speech on equity, where one of the things that he said was that he's appointed Susan Rice to be like the equity czar who will ensure that equity throughout the entire federal government is a priority. And he acknowledged that in the US, there is systematic racism. I think some of that was one of the few acknowledgements that have come out of the establishment that there is systematic racism. Previously, we've had denials of all of this and so forth. Could you talk to us about the state of brothers and sisters in the US?
You know, it's not unusual that that a Democrat will come out and say, yes, there's systematic racism. If we see the difference, I mean, Bush was in office and he was claiming that, oh, racism was over, you know. Obama comes and he admits, yes, there is racism and there's different problems. Trump comes back and acts like this doesn't exist. So Biden now comes and says, yes, there is. But it really, we have to look at, well, what are they really doing about it? I mean, there's been very little change in terms of this massive prisoner population that we talked about, for instance. There has been an increase in the gap between wages and wealth that people of color have and the white population has. Just as there's been an overall increase in the gap between the wealthy and the masses. So the situation really hasn't changed. I think one of the things that has changed is the spotlight is more on a lot of the racism. I mean, Black Lives Matters movement was able to grow because we could connect better, and once some incident happened, whether it was in South Texas or in East LA, people were able to get the word out in terms of that. But we don't really see a big change in terms of the attitudes that police had in terms of oppressing people. In fact, I think it's gotten a lot worse. I remember being, you know, a teenager and getting stopped by the police. And what they would do is they would tell you, okay, get up against the wall, put your hands on the wall, or put your hands on the car. Then it migrated somehow to get down on the ground, put your hands flat behind your head on the ground. Then it migrated somehow to you're on the ground and a policeman has a knee on your neck or your back. You know, that's not progress, that's moving backwards in terms of police brutality and in terms of oppression of a people. So we have to really look at those kind of things when people say, yeah, I acknowledge there's some inequality, but really what's gonna happen, what's the change gonna be? And just putting a black face in front doesn't mean anything. I mean, remember now, Bush was the first one to have Colin Powell there as a front person. And what happened when he was there? He was running around claiming that they were weapons of mass destruction, and it led to the whole destruction of Iraq. So just having a black face out front doesn't mean anything any more than the fact that Obama was the president and it led to the massive bombing. More bombs were dropped in Libya than in Vietnam, just in that short span, because they could sit there right in the Mediterranean and just lob rockets between Tripoli and Benghazi and destroy the basic infrastructure, communication structure, the road structure of the whole country in a blink of an eye without anybody really saying anything because of the control capitalism has over the media.
I think one of the things that speak to the illusion that you are referring to is the fact that in the US today, 3 out of every 3 African Americans and Latinos die of COVID as opposed to 1 of white Americans. So that I think speaks to the systematic socioeconomic issues and the ongoing racism that is affecting the country. Some time ago, we were talking about the impact that COVID has had on you personally, and that you have not been able to travel. What has it been its impact on the brothers and sisters in the US?
Well, I mean, you just gave the statistic there, and that speaks to not only Africans, but our brown brothers and sisters, Latinas, who have been hit the hardest. And it's a complex situation. One, these are people who are in the working positions that expose more. They're the ones that are working in the fast food restaurants. They're the ones in the retail places that we know are more exposed. They're the ones that are also living in communities that have the poorest access to healthcare. So this combination, you know, is led to that. And they also are generally in the communities where the housing situation is more confined in terms of more people within the living space. So that all of these things combine, but the problem has been just the negligent way that the country handled that whole COVID situation. And it has led to this massive numbers of people losing their lives.
Yeah. So you spoke about this consensus between the Republicans and the Democrats. One person has written previously that both of them believe in the American empire. The only thing that differs between the two of them is that the Democrats cloak it in this mystique of multilateralism. And they act that they want a system that is accountable and rule-based and so forth. Meanwhile, they also seek dominance of the world order. Now, you've shown that map where the bases, they have bases in Africa. And one of the interesting things when you look at it is that those areas, that whole band of the continent includes also the Gulf of Guinea, which has a lot of oil reserves. So American foreign policy as directed by its need for energy continues. And what would you say about that?
You're right. I mean, American, and I like to say the USA because America is North and South America. This is part of their massive propaganda that somehow we equate the United States of America as America, and ignore the fact that they aren't even the majority of the population or the land base of the Americas. But they definitely, their motive is national, what they call national interest. Now, what national interest really is the capitalist interest within the U.S., not the masses' interest. So they operate in that sphere. So whether they are invading Iraq or they're blowing up things in Libya or exerting their control in the Gulf of Guinea in terms of oil revenues, or arranging contracts with other countries in Africa around oil, but it goes beyond that. I mean, it's obviously linked. We know the history of the Congo was linked to the resources in the Congo, the mineral resources, the mining resources. And even now we know the conspiracy around the extraction of coltan in the eastern part of the Congo is very much linked to the ambitions of the US and their needs in terms of that. So it's around the interests of the capitalists in the United States of America that both parties rally. And they rally, I mean, that's where their paycheck, I talked to you about this $14 billion spent on campaign money. They're campaigning, these are corporations are donating, and wealthy capitalists are donating to these individuals in these two parties so that they will maintain the interest and the control for the capitalist class.
Yeah. Those bases also speaks to sort of America's nervousness with the Chinese influence on the African continent and their whole attempts of geopolitical control. What would you see as the sort of the implications of that competition on the African continent? Because we have in the past seen the effects of the Cold War, because the Cold War was never fought in Russia or the USA. In many cases, it was fought in the countries of the South, in Africa and so forth. So what does that sort of competition between the China and America portend for Africa?
A lot of people compare the current competition with the Cold War, and I think it is quite different. During the so-called Cold War, you basically had almost two separate kind of systems, in that the Soviet Union, largely in China to some extent, was aligned with the Eastern European countries in an economic bloc that sort of sat outside of the major capitalist bloc. And it was a vicious kind of competition that, and also remember now the backdrop then was a lot of liberation struggles taking place from Cuba to the Congo. And it involved the Chinese and the Russians actively serving to help the liberation forces. Now we're post that colonial period, and it's China and Russia are not about giving a bunch of arms and arming any force to revolutionize anywhere in Africa or the world, in my opinion, at this point. So once they became part of the broader capitalist structure in terms of the so-called market system, they took a different strategy. Now, China calls it socialism with Chinese characteristics, but basically what they've been able to do is to carve out a significant part of the market system by operating a manufacturing environment that led to trade surpluses and has led to them basically sitting on a lot of US dollars, either in the form of bonds or in the form of cash that they can use. And then they can extend these to, whether it's part of this Road and Belt Initiative, extend this in terms of grants or loans to help people build railroads. And they're making a conscious effort to subvert the US dominance. The US dominance exists largely because of the global dominance that they have in terms of trade linked with their bases, but they sit in a precarious situation compared to China, which not only has a larger population, but is part of the broader geographic mass that links Europe and Asia into Africa as one mass. That's one of the reasons the Chinese strategy is to build railroads. If you think about it, massive railroads with these high-speed trains is more efficient, more ecological way of actually conducting trade. And this is what you're going to see in the future. You're going to see more of the trade, whether it's trade coming straight from China into Germany on rail. Then you'll see now with the shipping industry that's dominated by the US. And this is going to have an impact in terms of that. Now, in terms of China's role in Africa, yes, they've become the major trade partner. There is concern in terms of how that's displaced local manufacturing. And I think this is something that why we need to have a serious trade arrangement within Africa, and there needs to be serious efforts to organize Africa economically on a global scale.
I now invite comrades to share comments and to ask questions either on Facebook through the various pages we're live streaming on, or through the WhatsApp, through the Zoom webinar that we're hosting. I have a comment which also speaks to maybe a question from Comrade Hana Relifuga. He writes, it's clear from the presentation that neocolonialism is not only a political approach, but also a military-backed approach. I find that one of the key weaknesses of the African Revolution is its inability to defend itself when attacked militarily. Open quote, Gaddafi, I find it therefore delusional that the African Revolution can succeed on the political conscientization and mobilization without the capacity to defend itself. Any comments on that comment?
It's on point. I mean, and this is part of why we've made such a serious effort to expose the militarism, to expose the CIA, expose the FBI, to launch an offensive against the building of AFRICOM, because it's those structures that are much more powerful at this point and much more well-financed and organized, and have been able to, for years, to do everything from overthrowing Lumumba and Nkrumah to destroying Libya. You know, so we recognize this, and we should recognize how serious this problem is. I mean, what happened with Libya? I mean, you had a Security Council with Nigeria and South Africa sitting on it, devoted for this nonsensical no-fly zone position that led to the massive bombing that actually destroyed Libya. So what does that say about the lack of unity and the complicity that our current leadership has, and really the need for us to call for African unity? And part of that has to be with regards to recognizing the need for us to have military unity.
So the situation of Libya is of great interest to many of the comrades who are on Facebook and the Zoom Q&A. Could you, if you have any latest information, update us on the situation there? We know that it was it hit the media some time ago when Hillary Clinton was campaigning against Donald Trump with the emails and so on and so forth. Do you have any update and analysis you can share with us with regards to that situation?
I'm not really that versed on the latest developments there. I do, know that from the map you can see that the U.S. has military facilities there. We do know that there's engagement from a number of forces, from Russia to Turkey to the UN, and the different contending forces there that represent various camps. And there is even a force that is reflective of the Jamahiriya and Gaddafi, but I'm not really up on the latest. I would encourage everyone to study that more, but that really is not one of my strengths in terms of what I've been studying.
We are fortunate in that you've lived and worked in a number of African countries, and you've helped organize around Pan-Africanism and the ideal of liberation for Africa. What is the status of all the forces that are BC Pan-Africanist inclined? What would you rate their status in the continent?
I think we're going through a challenging period where many of us, like you and I, are getting the gray hairs. And it really speaks to the need for us to emphasize our organizing on the university campuses and amongst the youth. I think that we're also are opening our eyes much more to the significant role that women are playing and our women's unions are playing than we did 20 or 30 years ago. And we're coming to recognize that patriarchy has impacted us negatively, just as we know that it impacts capitalism. And I think that we're coming to try to come to grips with that in terms of how we address issues with regards to the role of women and gender. So that I think is a positive. I think we have such great potential when I reflect back on the situation in the 70s where there are very few university campuses in Africa, one, and it was very difficult to do any organizing because of the repressive nature of some of the governments, like particularly I remember in Kenya, in the Moi, you students could not, they were being gunned down and arrested. So now it's much more opportunities for us to organize our youth, and we have many, many more universities and the population in terms of those at the universities has grown. So the potential for us is there. Now, neocolonialism is real, and it's not just a matter of a neocolonial leader is openly in support of Western governments, like some of our leaders are, and allow bases to exist there. It's even the nature of neocolonialism in states that are trying to do something positive, like Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, even though it did its land reclamation, it still is dominated by neocolonialism because the corporate structure and the finance system, the debts to the IMF and the World Bank make it impossible to move out of neocolonialism. So we have to come to study and understand these things more and have our people direct our energies at the real enemy. I see too much media here, for instance, in Azania pointing the finger at the leadership in Zimbabwe. Now, the leadership isn't perfect, but the leadership is not the major problem in Zimbabwe. The major problem is the sanctions. The major problem is the foot of imperialism and neocolonialism that's on the neck of the people, the masses in Zimbabwe. And it's on us as Africans to stand up and support the people and oppose the imperialist and neocolonial attitude and sanctions that exist in places like that.
So, Olise Siabo on Facebook asked the question that is both related to your comments now about Zimbabwe and your last comment that speaks to socialist principles. He asked, how does a country mitigate the backlash against socialism in the form of sanctions and regime change? We've seen the US backlash in Venezuela, and we've seen the backlash in Zimbabwe. So he's essentially saying, how do we push our program of a united Africa under socialism when we have these backlashes? What can we do to mitigate those backlashes?
Well, that speaks to the importance of a revolutionary approach. And when I say that, I mean that people have to understand that revolution is a drastic change, and to have revolution, to create revolution, takes a hell of a lot of work. You know, you don't just have revolutionary changes because we just call it revolution and we claim we're revolutionary. It takes a lot of work. You know, and I sometimes use examples that are not social revolutions to get people to understand it. When various inventions came about, you know, it wasn't just something that somebody just snapped their fingers and said, okay, I'm going to design this computer, or I'm going to make a cell phone. It was a lot of people, a lot of work, a lot of staying up, scratching their heads, going through experiments and things like that before they came up with it to make some real changes. I'm not just talking about painting the case a different color, you know, to make some real changes, whether you're talking about science, technology, and certainly in the social arena, it takes a lot of hard work, and people have to realize that. So within the frameworks of the political parties that are in control in these countries, they get down to doing that hard work. That was one of the beauties in Venezuela. They went to the countryside. They built these, the whole Bolivarian circles in the communities. They transferred funds to that. The same thing in Bolivia. Bolivia, the people were organized. So when the military coup came in Bolivia, and they tried to oppress the political party, the people suffered, but they went to the election at the next ballot and voted the revolutionary forces right back in power, and the military had to step back. So that's because they were seriously committed and disciplined about revolution. And that's what we need to have. It's unfortunate that we don't have that on a global perspective within Africa. They've consciously kept us divided around these borders. And that's why I think the agenda of any revolutionary organization, the AZAPO, the PAC, ZANU-PF, has to be about looking beyond the borders, has to address ending these borders, has to address coming together and supporting the struggles of our people on a global scale, which means that those places that are most under attack, like Zimbabwe, there's a responsibility of Pan-Africanists all over to come to the fore and challenge that. There needs to be more challenge, for instance, here, the ruling government, to challenge them to support the land reclamation and to call for the end of sanctions. Instead, what do we have on the media is dominated more by the right wing, talking about why is ANC making this trip? They're catering to ZANU-PF. No, it's a question of supporting the masses of people, and there needs to be an extension of that effort. And it's going to be the revolutionary forces like AZAPO and the PAC and the A-APRP that push for that. Thank you.
Yeah. We have a question from is it Comrade Simpiwe? Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Comrade Tavis. Comrade Trimble, just your views and comments. You know, you would have noted a couple of decades ago, 3-4 decades ago, it was unthought of that you would have, you know, an African American or a Black leader in, you know, in the presidency of America. You know, we've seen a couple of years, just a couple of years ago, Barack Obama rising to the presidency of America. And now with the Biden campaign, you know, Kamala Harris is now the deputy president. And again, in the last year or so, we've also seen the influence of the Black Lives Matter, you know, that phenomenon in the campaign taking a global posture, so to speak. And, you know, with American, or what is it, African Americans being the minority in America, this observable influence of Black Americans or African Americans in American politics and global politics has given rise to the influence that we see of Black Americans in the geopolitics of the world and the geopolitics of America, and it's quite an interesting phenomenon. And I'm not too sure what is the view of the A-APRP on this rise of the American, or what is it, African American influence in the politics of America, as well as the world. I mean, we see now that the Black Lives Matter campaign has been global and taken over not only by Blacks across the world, but just about everybody has latched onto that campaign. How can the same influence be seen to permeate Africa and some Black people in the diaspora to the point where Blacks can be provided with leadership to champion their own cause? Because I mean, every time when we see Black leadership rising in America, the African leaders celebrate and become fans instead of providing leadership in driving the Black agenda in the geopolitics of the world. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the phenomena, but and I'll deal with the Black Lives Matter as a separate one. But the Africans, and I refer to as Africans in America. I'm African born in America, living in Azania now, but we have Africans representing 14% of the population in the US, the Africans, largely Africans born in the US. And since the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, where we were able to elect a significant number of Africans born in America in elected positions, mayors of Gary, Indiana to Los Angeles, and people were in a really uproar why we've made it. But the reality was that those leaders just represented the capitalist system, So it is no real surprise that we have Obama, Susan Rice, Kamala Harris that are now put out to be our poster people that sort of try to tell the masses and particularly the youth that now we've arrived. But we know that they represent the interests of that political party, the Democratic Party in this case, which represents a certain faction of the capitalist class. And it's just an effort to give this illusion, once again, of that we no longer have white supremacy, but we can see the white supremacy still exists within the economic realities. And just as earlier you mentioned the COVID numbers, and we mentioned the prison population numbers, that's the reality of our people sitting in prisons or dying of COVID. Now, having a face up here now and then that smiles and says, yes, you can make it, you can be a president, and can go out to the little schools and encourage little girls to say, yes, you can be a president too, is all part of the, the media hype around it. Now, the Black Lives Matter situation is a little different because that really came out of the masses where people were opposed to police brutality. And it's swung clear across the world where you had people in Palestine sending messages telling those demonstrators how they could possibly, protect themselves against the tear gas, and seeing banners at Black Lives Matters demonstrations supporting Palestinians was a very positive international linkage. Now, unfortunately, what has happened is the funding that's come about now that props up some of these, that even get some of the Black Lives Matter people to run for office under the Democratic Party, and the massive support that has come out since this police brutality, where corporations are doing one thing or another. Even I saw where, for instance, Apple now has an Apple Watch, with the red, black, and green, you know, for African History Month. So you have this kind of things that are going on that subvert efforts like the Black Lives Matter. So we have to be cautious of what's happening. But I don't think these icons are any different than how the media treated Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela became the icon for Africa, you know, during the latter part of the 20th century, early part of this century. And you know, we know really, I mean, he suffered. He was a liberation struggler, but he, in my opinion, was not a revolutionary, you know. But he was, so he made some contribution. But you see that how even his image is then being projected and utilized in terms of that. But the use of imagery is part of the whole control of the media that capitalists have.
Yeah. So the mobilization that has happened, maybe as a result of Black Lives Matter movement, and recently it was reported that Biden, he got to the presidency at the back of mainly Black women and Black people in general in the US who voted for. There seems to be some form of mobilization that is happening there. How could revolutionary parties use that moment to deepen the consciousness of brothers and sisters and to advance the cause of Pan-Africanism and the African Revolution?
The reality is there's a whole lot of additional political education that's needed in organization at this time. And that's why I emphasize the African Revolutionary Intelligentsia. We need to really, the core of us that here now need to study more, need to organize others to really get this analysis together to present to people. I've had various discussions over, you know, toward the end of the last year with friends and relatives that just says, oh, we got to get out and vote for Biden. We got to vote for Biden. And I said, well, you know, look at the history of the Democratic Party. Why are you so upset? Well, Trump has done so much damage. So the mentality is what I call voting for the good slave master, you know, and that's really what it is. You know, we vote for the good slave master and they'll say, well, John, we don't want Trump in there. He's just done so much damage. So instead of waking up and saying, we need to burn the plantation down and have a slave revolt, which takes more commitment, more organization, more sacrifice. Unfortunately, the attitude is we need to vote in the good slave master. And until we get a serious revolutionary African intelligentsia that can really lay out the line a lot better than we are now, to convince a large mass enough people that we don't want the good slave master or the bad slave master. We don't want the good cop or the bad cop. We want revolution. Until then, you're going to have this situation. And to realize that African population was the swing vote. It was the swing vote. It's not like we had, you know, they were 50% of the people voting. I mean, they weren't even 10% of the population voting, you know. But it's just that if you looked at the Africans in the U.S. that voted for Biden, they were 95%, while those that voted for Trump were maybe 5%. So that meant that the white people who were, you know, 44 or 5% voting for Biden and the 50-something% voting for Trump. So we were able to kind of swing that vote there. But what does that say about the condition, the mentality of the majority of the population in the country? This is why I talked about the illusions of democracy and the ignorance and arrogance of the unfortunate masses of white workers there that have bought off onto this. And this is one of the reasons that I have no intention of going back and living there.
Yeah.
I'll deal with the power outages here when I have to, but no going back to the slave plantation.
No going back to the slave plantation. I have a comment here that says white supremacy and liberalism does not rely on a revolutionarized white people. So why is it that for us to be able to attain what we need to attain, we need to be studying? That's the comment. Essentially, the comment is saying that what you are proposing that we do going forward is that we must undertake more revolutionary political education so that to capacitate ourselves to analyze and to be able to carry on the struggle. This person is saying white supremacy and liberalism has not relied on like political education for it to succeed, and it seems to be succeeding on its own to forward its objectives. Your thoughts?
Well, actually, I would disagree. I think they rely very much on political miseducation. I mean, they control the educational system. They're the ones that are propagating these lies, is saying, oh, the reason Zimbabwe is having problems is they mismanage their government. The reason African governments are having problems is that they don't know how to govern themselves. We need to step in. I mean, all of these kinds of lies that are being propagated. I mean, even the craziness that went on in terms of white supremacists marching on the Capitol is that massive counter-political education that they were receiving about this election being rigged. The Trump was running around saying he really won. That's political education to them. But political education can be revolutionary, can be scientific, or it can be bogus. Unfortunately, the way capitalism maintains its power, it propagates a lot of bogus political education. I mean, for years they were running around, trumpeting that Africans are inferior. Look at the shape of their heads, and had these people doing so-called scientific studies, measuring that. I mean, that was their education. Even today, for instance, in the U.S., they have people running around talking about Columbus discovered America, celebrating Columbus Day as a holiday. That's education. It's their political education. It's bogus political education, which is why we have to be emphatic about revolutionary political education.
So even the QAnon's conspiracies are a high form of their political education. Miseducation, it might be, but it is a form of political education. I'm still inviting comrades to and ladies and gentlemen to send through questions, comments. Could be on Zoom or on Facebook pages. As we talk, I keep on checking all the Facebook pages that we are live streaming on, and I will then be able to pose your questions to Comrade Trimble. So you say you are more than willing to take the load shedding and all those issues rather than go back and live under the whip of a good slave master. So why isn't that a sort of a predominant attitude within the US?
That's a very good point, and it's because, and it links to this reactionary political education and to the reality. I talk to my family and about it, and friends, and many of them, this is their life is growing up in Alabama. Or for instance, I have an older sister, and we grew up in Chicago, and she stayed in Chicago. She's never moved out of Chicago. So we have a lot of people, their life is the area for her. She grew up on the South Side. She lived on the South Side of Chicago all her life, and that's what she knows and what she's comfortable with. I've had the advantage of having moved out at an early age, lived in different places in the US, traveled, and to see things and not feeling as attached, as unfortunately a lot of people are very attached to their particular area. And it's all over. I mean, you have people here in Azania, they are very attached to the area, and they are even recoiling to the presence of Africans from other countries here in Azania, and that's part of that lack of extensive political education and understanding from a global perspective. But it's that's a serious thing in the US. And unfortunately, with this mentality, the US, is great or is going to be great again attitude that's pervasive. you have our people who, even though they're suffering under all kinds of oppression with police brutality and high prison rates and drugs and inequality and COVID, you have them thinking that their life there is better than if they left.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the amazing things that I have seen, that it's said that amongst Africans living, the male subsection of the population of Africans living in America, that Trump, the MAGA, Make America Great Again message has sort of entrenched itself, that there was a sort of a big support for Trump. And it has been a continuing puzzle for me. You have that, although it's a significant it's a minority of the people, you have that at one hand. On the one hand, you have the killing of Black people, particularly Black males, by police. And then you have these two sort of diametrically opposed views about the US and their condition. It's been puzzling. Can you help someone who's in the continent to sort of understand this both sort of the illusion of America Great and the reality, and why it's not leading to some sort of an awareness?
Well, no, it's a direct result of the lack of awareness in terms of, like I was saying, this illusion that and it's perpetuated on a global scale. When I go around in here and people hear my accent and they say, "Oh, you're born in America. Oh, I want to go to America." And I'm like, "Why?" I say, my wife and I both said, "Why? Would you realize what's really going on there?" No, they don't. They watch some TV show or see a movie, and that's what they think the United States is. The LA they see on a movie. So that same thing that happens here is happening in the US, when people see that and they think, "Oh, well, I might be living in squalor, but right over the road, when I get a little bit something and I move over the road, that's where I'm going to be living. I'm going to be living in the Hollywood life," and it's an illusion that's perpetuated. But it's also the fact that so many people can't reach that illusion is what has created this craziness on the right. This is why you had the people running around believing this QAnon nonsense, or claiming that the reason that we can't get jobs is because of these migrants from Mexico, or believing that the problem is that there's some big conspiracy of Muslim practicing individuals are conspiring to blow up my shopping mall in suburban Missouri somewhere. That kind of thinking comes out because they are not being successful, and they don't understand that the lack of being able to move up is the very flaws of capitalism. But capitalism has to give an excuse. So they do like Trump. They say, "We got to put a border up to stop these people from coming across and bringing drugs and raping people and taking jobs." So you had that nonsense.
In one of your slides, you spoke about I think you highlighted some of the steps that we need to take in terms of how we advance the African cause, and you highlighted the issue of building an African revolutionary intelligentsia. Could you share with us some more, if someone wants to get on board with that program and wants to help advance, what are the steps that one could engage in towards advancing that cause?
Well, what the All African People's Revolutionary Party does is we have for years what we call our Political Education Work Study Circle program. And what that is this is where we bring together Africans all over the world that can join this, and they basically bring them together in groups from 3 to 12, where they study on a regular basis, study African history, they study about capitalism and Zionism, they study about imperialism and neocolonialism and socialism and communism, and so that they can get a better understanding of what's going on around us today and the historical legacy that created what we have today, and how they can make changes. And they meet every 2 weeks generally for 2 or 3 hours, and cover about 70 pages of reading materials. And then they also discuss things that are happening politically in terms of currently or geopolitical areas, and then discuss activities that we're doing. But it's a program open to anyone. The only thing you have to do is you have to have discipline. And because we see the first thing that we need to emphasize in building a revolutionary movement is discipline. That's what we lack more than anything else. How many times have you been in a situation you were organizing a meeting and people come dragging in a half an hour late? You know, this whole attitude in terms of the lack of discipline is what has hurt us as revolutionaries. So what we try to do with our political education work study program is emphasize discipline. You don't have to agree with all of the principles of the A-APRP. What you have to do is you have to have discipline to maintain in the program, read the material, come study with everyone, discuss it, then take these ideas out to other people. That's the work part of it, is study and work. Because taking these ideas will then get you really trained on how to explain what's going on and how to better, because once you explain what's going on, you get to better understand what's going on, and that's reinforcing. So this is a program we have, but we encourage other parties, have a political education program. Get your people studying, understanding what's going on, because it's our lag in terms of keeping up with what's going on in terms of an analysis that's hurting us. We can't just come right out when they put some nonsense in the media. We don't have the organized forces to come right out with a strong bang back in terms of saying, this is nonsense, this is really what's happening, this is what should happen in Libya. In Libya's example, Libya was unfolding for months before they voted in the UN. We didn't have the political forces to put forth analysis swiftly enough to counter that. You know, we had a voice, but it was weak. So we had more revolutionary intelligentsia that could span out among the masses, spreading out exactly what's going on when things happen. We'll engage the masses more, recruit the masses more, and build. Because intelligentsia is not the end all. That's just a starting point where we are now. That because we have a small force, we have to build it up to be able to reach out to the broader masses.
I have a question from Comrade Twix. Comrade Twix, please go ahead.
Good day, comrades. Mine is a little bit more than a comment than a question, comrade.
Okay, that's fine.
Just greetings to Comrade John, and I'm glad that you're here and sharing your information. You know, I just want, for the sake of other comrades and also those listening, I think our history with the A-APRP goes all the way back, as was articulated, back to the 70s and 80s. In fact, one of the comrades, Comrade Bagwa, late Comrade Bagwa, was one of the people who was hosted by the A-APRP in the 70s. Number two, I also want to say that our history is concrete. There's concrete evidence of our relationship. We've been able to do, it's more than just theory. Through our work with the A-APRP, we've also been able to create a relationship with Libya. We've been able to create a relationship with Eritrea. Those relationships were consolidated through our other regions and ultimately ended up with us being able to get our people, get the necessary skills in the areas of relevance for the pursuance of our struggle for national liberation and social emancipation here in Azania. I just want to say that so that people need to understand that our relationship with the A-APRP is more than just theoretical. There are concrete results from that relationship. Thank you.
Definitely thank you for that, Twigs.
Yeah. So Comrade Twigs was in the BCMA, was stationed in the US, and I believe he has a long-standing relationship with you as well, Comrade Trimble, that the two of you go a long way. So do you want to share a bit, maybe some other insights or comments with regards to the relationship and its concrete manifestation? Not necessarily AZAPO alone, but other parties within the African continent that the All African People's Revolutionary Party has worked with, and what have been the concrete outcomes of that work?
Well, definitely the AZAPO, the BCM was, I think, one of the strongest relationships we had in terms of African liberation movements, largely because of people like Twiggs and others who were students at that time in places like the US and Canada and UK that played a role not only in exposing apartheid, but in terms of bringing the broader Pan-African forces together. As Twiggs had mentioned, it allowed for the linkage between our organizations and the liberation movement in Eritrea, the Jamahiriya in Libya, in terms of a broader set of forces. During that period of the 70s, that was when I was exposed to the PAC, the ANC, ZANU, and ZAPU, because that was before it was ZANU-PF, and a range of other liberation movements, PIGC, and that allowed us to have this connectivity. I think that what we have seen is the need for us to escalate our political education post independence in all of these instances. There was much more rigor in the ideological engagement that I found with not only BCM forces, but even with the ANC forces that were in exile didn't exist now. You know, I think that it's a different kind of situation that is become too pragmatic, in my opinion, across Africa. And it's going to take our forces to really escalate the move toward revolution in order to succeed in terms of our Pan-African journey and mission. So I would like to continue on with a bit about the importance of Pan-Africanism, particularly the socialist element within Pan-Africanism. Often you have people who are thinking of Pan-Africanism as just, okay, Africa coming together, but we really need to come to grips with the need for socialism, a scientific socialism that means that the masses are in control of production and the distribution, and that this system of production and distribution is organized to benefit the masses of people and not just this handful that we see happening now, whether it's the handful here in Azania that are really reaping the benefits of post-apartheid, or whether it's the handful that continue to be the big money people in the US or Europe. So it's a need for us to understand and embrace scientific socialism on a broader scale, and to understand that this is really just a path to eventual society which will be communist, in terms of people living in a situation where they are contributing based on their ability and receiving just based on their needs. But that requires such a high level of consciousness, which goes back to why it's so important for us to emphasize political education, because our consciousness can only come from political education. And this also links to why all of us need to understand the ideologies that exist in the world and need to embrace a revolutionary ideology, and understand the ideologies are the set of ideas that guide people's actions. Each organization has an ideology, but one of the things that capitalism projects is ignorance around this. We're not taught about ideologies at the grade school or university. This is something that should be taught at an early age to get people to understand that as conscious beings, we have to cultivate our consciousness. We have to cultivate our consciousness, which means we have to have political education. And one of the fundamental parts of that is we have to understand ideology, because ideology is a set of ideas that guide our actions. But if they don't even teach about that, then how is anybody supposed to even come to grips with trying to grasp what ideas guide their actions? So this is really the crux, I think, of where we have to go with regards to political education. So one of the first things we do in orientating people to that want to possibly join one of our work study circles in our program is we discuss this ideology, this notion of ideology and consciousness and political consciousness. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. No, thank you very much, Comrade Trimble. I think that's a good point to end this discussion, and I think we've also opened a possible avenue in which we can bring you back for us to all come and talk about socialism and so forth. So thank you very much for this insightful presentation that you have given us, and your time in dealing with the question and your patience with my technology issues. And I'd like to thank everyone else for their patience with my technological issues. Maybe just if people want to learn more about All African People's Revolutionary Party, you can share a website.
Yes, let's see if I can bring up something. Okay, no, it's only host now.
On your slides, you had spoken about the World Pan-African something. Maybe
yeah, actually, the easiest thing is if you let's see, go to, oops. I'm trying to see if I have a slide on it. Okay, the easiest one that actually will get you to all of the sites is just to go to www.pam.org. www.pam.org, and that will take you to all the organizations that are part of the worldwide Pan-African movement, and there'll be links to the A-APRP, which is also APRP-intl.org. But it's easier if you can go there, because that would be a good for anyone here to see all of the different organizations that are part of the broader movement. And you'll see links to all of our organizations. But I'd be happy to come back on at a later time. And I appreciate being able to be on. And actually now I have to go to, actually we're starting we have our cadre circle meeting starting at 2:30 my time. So I rush to that meeting, which is an online meeting in another room. But we're serious about our study, even though we've been doing it for over 40 years. So we got to continue. So. Excellent.
That's a good note to leave it on. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. Enjoy your session, Comrade Trimble. And to the rest of you, have a good afternoon. Take care.
I'm more than welcome to come back and talk on other topics. Thank you.
Excellent. We'll definitely invite you back. Thank you all. Bye-bye.